How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Sorry, I'm
Hmm?
like holding my phone 10 different ways.
No worries. You get settled and we're not ready. We don't have to start right now. You get settled and be comfortable.
Okay, cool.
You look
This is
great.
exciting. My first Instagram live.
Is it? I've been doing it. I think everybody I've done so far, and I've done like, I got to tell you, I've done like 30 or 40. It's crazy. And it's everybody's first, but not the last, because this is how we're playing nowadays, you know?
I know. I've watched a bunch now,
It's
but
crazy. Oh, you're sweet. Thank you. So it's 4 o'clock officially. So you ready to start?
I'm ready, I
I think,
think.
okay, I
I
think
need
we
a
have a little bit of
selfie
a
stick.
delay.
I should
So,
invest in one of those.
no, I have mine leaned against a potter, a little pot thing. But apparently they say if you put your angle up here, you're more appealing. Oh, it does look better, but it's too much work. So whatever. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
whatever.
let's just start by telling everybody who you are.
Yeah. Hi, guys. It's awesome to be here. This is my first Instagram live. I've known Jeff for a few years now, so it's cool to see you, albeit virtually. My name is Bridget Fertile. I am the founder and head distiller of Owney's Rum. I'm currently in actually a bar, speakeasy at my parents' house where I grew up, which actually is a lot of the inspiration for the branding about Owney's, but we'll get into that. Yeah, I founded Owney's about 8 years ago now, almost 8 years ago. And yeah, a distillery in Brooklyn on the east side of Williamsburg / Bushwick. I don't know. There's a debate going on about what the actual neighborhood is called. So I'll just say we're both. I don't know.
Okay, that works. So, I guess we'll just say a little bit of like you want to give the whole story because people might not know you, of your
Sure.
background and how you started Owney's and where it is now.
Yeah. So, I'm just trying to figure out. Okay, I'm gonna just look at you. I think that's the best way to go
It's
about this.
weird. It's weird no matter what you do. So
I'm
don't worry
sure
about it.
within 1 minute I'll be fine. I just,
Yeah.
uh, as I said, I found it almost 8 years ago on the dot after a career on Wall Street. As some of you may or may not know, I know Jeff's the wine man of the year. So I don't know how much you guys know about the craft spirits world, but most of us did not start out our careers in making spirits, as the industry, at least when I started Owney's, was fairly immature again in the US and really hadn't started to come into its own since pre-prohibition. The laws were just starting to ease. There was just starting to be new demand for craft spirits, new brands, new ways of making things, and I kind of was following the trends in the industry from afar as I was sitting at my desk at a hedge fund investing in consumer goods with a specialty in beverages and specifically within global alcohol. I had kind of done business school at the undergrad and grad levels in finance and went and found myself a job at a fund, naturally, I guess, native New Yorker, and spent about 6 years there, and led to getting inspired to sort of disrupt the American rum category, as I thought it was being neglected in the craft spirits and the American distilling renaissance. Lots of awesome whiskeys and gins and liqueurs and some vodkas being made, but I thought rum was being neglected, and that was kind of ironic since rum was America's first spirit, super important to our history. First distillery on record was in the colonial America in the Northeast, on present-day Staten Island in the 1660s, and we made rum. So a lot of those things, not only from a trend perspective, a white space in rum and American rum, and also history and kind of a little bit of motivation to pursue my entrepreneurial dreams led me to jumping ship from the fund, I guess, at the end of 2011. I actually moved back into the house I'm currently quarantining in, where I grew up in Rockaway Beach in Queens. And I was only supposed to move back with my parents out of my apartment in Tribeca for a year, but 4 years in, I think it took me about 4 years to get out again.
Wow.
Yeah, we broke ground on the distillery. I guess it was March of 2012, and we finished construction in about August of 2012. I started distilling there then, and started kind of knocking on doors, selling Owneys out of the trunk of my car in October of 12. So it's been quite a journey since. Continues to be a journey. I kind of came in with all this finance network, but didn't really know anyone in the beverage or restaurant or bar business aside from like the bars I had worked at in college and like my local establishments in my neighborhood in Rockaway. And that was really interesting. And I always remember the people who took a big leap with me from the get-go. Jeff, you were one of them. So, you're forever in my heart and supporting my crazy endeavors with Owney's and, giving it really some nice love at one of like the most iconic establishments in New York at the Waverly Inn. So,
Oh, you're very sweet. That's
yeah.
I wouldn't do it if it wasn't good stuff.
Thanks.
And I want to talk about my little journey through rum, but can you give a background on rum? Like, why was it the first American thing? Why does it come from the Caribbean? What happened that it kind of fell off? And that you touched on it a little bit, but why you decided to do rum?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of the islands in the Caribbean like to fight over where rum was first invented. But from all of my accounts of reading, I give credit to Barbados. And rum was really first created in the Caribbean because of the thirsty the sugar thirst of Europeans. So Europeans came over, they started colonizing, and they took up a lot of shop in the Caribbean because it's great to grow sugarcane there. And they grow sugarcane and then send sugar back to Europe and sate the thirst for sugar. And one of the byproducts of sugar refining is molasses. And unfortunately, slaves that were working on the sugarcane plantations, well, I guess unfortunately because they were slaves and that's horrible, but fortunately they created rum essentially because they took all of the byproducts and stuff that the refineries were throwing out and discarding, and they figured out that they could actually ferment it. There was still sugar left in the molasses, and eventually that first beverage was fermented molasses essentially, and then they figured out they could distill it and make rum. So that's kind of the birthplace of rum. And then we started making it here in the colonial Northeast because the British were taking the molasses from their colonies in the Caribbean and taking the byproduct of their sugar refining and bringing it here to the Northeast. And then we were turning the molasses from the Caribbean into rum here, drinking it here, using it in trade here. And then again, unfortunately, some people might know of this term, the triangle trade, but a lot of the Brits would take the rum back to Africa, trade rum for slaves, bring the slaves back to the Caribbean colonies to work on the sugarcane plantations. Right. And we made a lot of rum here. Actually, it became a big part of the colonial American life. And then the Sugar Act of 1764 put a tax on molasses. And it made rum distilling unprofitable, and actually was one of the leading causes of the American Revolution because it wasn't profitable business anymore. And a lot of historians actually say the Boston Tea Party was really about molasses and not tea. The colonists dumped tea into the bay kind of as a symbol of molasses because molasses was too valuable to discard like that.
Oh, that's
and
really
then, unfortunately, after the revolution, we didn't grow sugar cane, obviously, in the Northeast, given the climate, and we lost access to the molasses that we were getting from the Caribbean because the British were no longer shipping it up here. People also started moving west and growing grains, and then discovered how to make whiskey from the grains that they were growing as they moved west. And whiskey kind of became known as America's spirit, but it was really rum to start out with.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then talk about Owney's and the Prohibition and your inspiration and your basement, how that all fits together.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I'm like this hedge fund investor sitting at my desk being like, all right, I'm bringing rum distilling back to New York. We're the first rum distillery in New York in over 90 years. And I'm going to make a really unique, really awesome, flavorful white rum using all natural ingredients and a real attention to detail during fermentation. I have like all of the like science sort of worked out in the vision of rum. And I'm like, all right, what am I going to call this? Like, I need a name. And so I just start thinking about my childhood and, what's important to me and my home. And I think about my basement. And when I was about 10 years old, I grew up here, and it was always a big part of like family gatherings and parties and stuff. But it wasn't until I was about 10 years old that one of the older people on the block told my parents, hey, by the way, the reason you bought that house, it was not the reason, but it was a big selling point for this beautiful bar in the basement. That actually was a speakeasy during Prohibition. It makes total sense. There's like a side door here. People could come in. Wow, that's really cool. So then I start thinking about that. I start reading about Prohibition because why not? It's an interesting topic. And came to learn that rum was a huge part of drinking during Prohibition, especially like on the East Coast and in New York. A lot of rum running was occurring. So basically ships coming up full of rum from the Caribbean, typically through Havana, through Cuba, dropping anchor at what was known as Rum Row, which was like 12 miles offshore in international waters. And then gangsters taking their boats out to Rum Row, filling them up with rum and smuggling them in to their speakeasies and distribution networks and so on and so forth. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And just thinking about rich people going on booze cruises to Havana during Prohibition and like my speakeasy. Long story short, I come across this man named Owen Madden who is nicknamed Owney. I start reading about him. He's this Irish immigrant raised in Hell's Kitchen on the west side of Manhattan. Very rambunctious, sort of rebellious teen, starts providing a lot for his family because his father had died when he was young and there were a bunch of siblings. Winds up becoming this crazy gangster of the Gopher Gang, which is a silly name, but a notoriously violent gang. And makes his money doing a bunch of things. He winds up going to jail. I think he was arrested like 60 something times, but only convicted once. And that was after he took 13 bullets and survived. And he comes out of the hospital like five days after taking 13 bullets in the 1910s at some point and survives. And of course, like 5 members of the rival gang go missing and he goes to jail for like 7 or 8 years. And I like to say he matures in jail. So he comes out of jail like mid-Prohibition. And instead of just like shooting up the place, he's like, okay, there's a real business opportunity here. So he starts, he buys the Cotton Club. Most people probably have heard of that very famous speakeasy in Harlem. He starts bootlegging. And then most endearing to me, he starts running rum. And for those unfamiliar with Rockaway Beach, Queens, it's on basically the southernmost tip of Long Island. It's this little peninsula, but it's, part of the 5 boroughs in Queens. Really, really narrow place with the Atlantic Ocean on one side and a bay on the other called Jamaica Bay, perfect for running rum. And he had this big establishment here in my hometown where he would smuggle rum in from the ships at Rum Row in the Caribbean and then distribute it to his speakeasies and all of his friends' speakeasies. And I'm like, okay, badass native New Yorker, took 13 bullets and survived, loved rum. Maybe he drank in my parents' basement. Good, sign me up. I like the name. So that's
awesome. And you did such a great job with the label. It really speaks to the history, everything. It's really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I worked with a friend on it.
How do you, because you bring in molasses, if I'm not mistaken, you said earlier you want to make it with the finest ingredients. How do you decide what molasses? you're going to use, and what does that mean when you make liquor that you're using the finest ingredients?
Yeah, so we wanted to use all natural, non-genetically modified sugarcane molasses. Sorry, something went. I think I'm okay now.
Okay. Yeah, you're good.
So we didn't want any additives, any added sugar, any added flavorings, any preservatives, anything of that nature. Just use like a purist sort of foundation for how we would make our products. So most rum is made from a blackstrap molasses, which has about 30 to 40% sugar content in it. It's the most widely available, cheapest form of food grade molasses. And we decided to source what's called like a higher test molasses, a higher grade, grade A. There are multiple names for it when using, and really good for fermentation in my opinion. So we looked to some sugarcane farmers in the United States. I wanted to use American cane. So we came across a couple of brokers in Florida and Louisiana, and we sourced an all natural, non-GMO, grade A sugarcane molasses, which essentially means it starts with about 80% sugar content. Really, you know, sweet, flavorful, aromatic, just good tasting. Obviously, unfortunately for us, a lot more expensive ingredient. Really great for the second part of our production process, which is fermentation. We like to bucket like our the unique flavors come from the ingredients, the attention to detail during fermentation, and then the way we distill them. So only 3 things we start with, which is that molasses, New York City tap water, which I'm a native, so I think it's the best in the world, but actually really good for fermentation. We don't have to add any nutrients back to it. We don't have to reverse osmosis, you know, filter the water. We just simply run it through a carbon filter before we start our process, like a big Brita filter. And then our proprietary yeast strain, which is really important for fermentation. So then we ferment those 3 things at temperature controlled tanks, 75 degrees Fahrenheit, for at least 6 days, typically 6 to 8 days. Lots of esters form during those 6 to 8 days of fermentation. Lots of sugar available. At the end of the fermentation, there's no sugar left in the wash. We just basically think those the three dynamics of the ingredients plus the way, the temperature we kind of stress the yeast out at really force a lot of esterification, whereas most rum is probably fermented at over 100 degrees for maybe 2 to 3 days. So it's typically a hot, fast fermentation where you get a tremendous amount of alcohol at the end. So high-powered yeast, like turbo yeast, maybe even champagne yeast. You get like a high yield, so maybe 10 to 13% alcohol, and then especially for white rum, that's typically like a neutral cane distillation after that, where you just extract 95% ABV, almost similar to a vodka, whereas we probably get 8% ABV at the end of the 6 to 8 day fermentation, and then we perform the low rectification distillation on a pot column hybrid still in batches, where we collect the distillate at 64% alcohol by volume. So it really showcases the flavor of the fermentation and the ingredients.
But the thing I really remember from when I visited you, this has got to be 7, maybe 8, maybe 9 years ago, a long time ago. You explained heads, hearts, and tails to me. Yeah. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So there are generally 3 parts to a distillation run: the heads, the hearts, and the tails. And basically the best way to think about distilling something is the separation of molecules by their boiling points. So at the end of the fermentation, you have a liquid. As I said, we've fermented all the all of the sugar out of it. So you've got dead yeast, you've got water, and then you've got different alcohol molecules, essentially. Ethanol, methanol, butanol, propanol, all have similar chemical structures with different numbers of carbon atoms in them. The number of carbon atoms in each, molecule or each alcohol affects the weight of the alcohol, and therefore the temperature it takes to get it to boil. So during a distillation, you want to boil off each one of those molecules at their scientifically defined boiling points, turn them into vapor, then turn them back into liquid, and pick and choose which ones you like the smell and taste of to go into your final product, essentially. The alcohol molecules like methanol have a lower number of carbon atoms in their chemical structure, takes less heat to boil them from, take them from a liquid to a gas and then back to a liquid. They're the first things to boil off the pot in a distillation. They're your heads, typically acetone, methanol, nail polish remover, essentially. Right. And you safely discard them. So we collect them and then we, send them off to be properly chemically discarded once we have a lot of them to ship out. Not really supposed to put them into the sewer system. The hearts are the meat and potatoes of your run. So in our case, we start collecting those about 95% alcohol by volume, and we stop at about 65%. I think I misspoke before, for the blended hearts cut to be about 82% alcohol by volume. So we're taking a lot more of those heavier alcohol molecules, more of those esters, a lot more flavor than what a typical white rum would taste. So like a lot of the funkiness, the smokiness, that grassiness of our Owney's Original comes from making a bigger hearts cut than a typical white rum distiller would take.
I see.
As I said, I kind of alluded to earlier, most of white rum is distilled that they just take 95, 96% alcohol by volume. And the only way you can really get to that in a mass amount is to use a continuous column distillation, and we use a pot column hybrid in batch distillations. So we get we're able to get, we want to get a wider cut. Tails come basically after that 65% alcohol by volume. They're like fusel oils, smell, taste, feel kind of oily. And we essentially just cut off our distillation once we start hitting those, because the remaining liquid in the pot is like, we've extracted most of the alcohol. It's safe to then discard down the drain.
Oh, okay. So then tell me, what is the overproof rum? How is that made?
Exactly. Same exact initial process, same exact ingredients, same exact fermentation, same exact distillation. So as I said before, our hearts cut is about 82% alcohol. We bottle it at 40%. So to get it from 82% alcohol to 40%, we just add water, essentially. Obviously, very precisely. The government is very specific about that. We have a lot of tools and things to measure that accurately. And then the overproof starts with that same 82% alcohol by volume, and we just add less water. So it's bottled at 65% alcohol by volume or 130 proof. And it's really interesting because it showcases just that you could use the same exact hearts, and just by adding certain degrees of water, get a lot different flavor. Like, to me, our overproof is like much funkier, much grassier, much earthy, more earthy than the original. That still is, you can still find that in the original, but there's a little bit more floral notes, a little bit more banana and fruity notes and molasses and cane in the original, whereas to me the overproof skews way more to grass.
Yeah, they're both delicious for different things. I didn't tell you I was going to ask this. It's a little bit of a very weird question, but right when this corona started happening, and we didn't know if there was going to be hand sanitizer or anything, I just started putting the overproof on my hands because it isn't high enough alcohol.
Yes.
And it doesn't dry out your hands. It left your hands feeling very soft. Do you have any insight into that?
I don't, but I know that it is. I'm just going to plug in here because I think that
I mean, there's no harsh chemicals, so maybe that's just it. But it feels like the sugar has an impact.
I've definitely, had it on my hands multiple times before, not necessarily deliberately, and it's never bothered me. So that's maybe maybe it's a new avenue for marketing.
There you go. Exactly. So when you think of fine rum, it's usually aged rum, and I learned to love that when I spent a little time in the Caribbean, and I still drink them. So two-part question. Going into this as a white rum producer, you were a little crazy or really smart, and you're ahead of the game now? And are you making one or the other? And are you going to make aged rum?
I think both. The answer to the first question is both. Yes, I would love to make aged rum, and it's on the list. It's just, as I'm sure you know, from your, any small producer of anything, cash is king kind of thing, and making aged rum just costs money. Takes not only from a storage perspective, but you have to put something you have to pay for ingredients, pay for energy to ferment and distill, and then buy a barrel, which is not cheap either, and put the rum into the barrel and let it sit there and pay rent on a space for, in my case, I would want to do it for a long period of time. To then get something out. Oh, and half of it will evaporate while it's
I didn't know that.
Not half, but depending on the temperature, a significant amount might evaporate, and depending on how long you actually age it for. So it's on the list. I just have to continue building the base business to a point where we can really start investing in all of the things that we need. I probably need to go, have a much bigger space to have a barrel house too.
Yeah.
But I also love aged rum, so I would love to do that.
But so has the white rum market changed? And I mean, I don't know anybody else who's making a fine white rum like you. Maybe there are, but is it a savvy move what you did, that you're selling everything and people are using it in cocktails and everything?
Yeah, I think, I've been waiting for 8 years now for there to be another rum maker in New York, because we have so many other, we have over 100 distilleries in the state, and and I shouldn't say nobody, because I don't know what every single distillery is making, but to the best of my knowledge, nobody is making that their flagship. So it might be part of a portfolio of things that they make, but nobody, at least locally, is in the space in New York. There are other awesome white rum makers around the country, Privateer and Montana, and just people that I've met over the years. They also make awesome aged rums as well. So I think that we are in a white space. I think that there is a challenge with white rum because it's made in a lot of parts of the world where they don't have the same costs associated with doing business, either from a tax perspective or a labor perspective. So they're able to make pretty quality rum at a much cheaper price. And I think that's one of, although we have so many things going for us, we play in a very niche space at our price point, which is working. I just time will tell to see how much that can scale, and if it just needs, at the moment, I'm just excited to be surviving in a very niche market. But I would like to take over the world one day. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Well, so as you know, I have friends who lived in the Caribbean and are really into the tea punch.
Yes.
And so every time I go to France, I bring them a bottle, and they put it in the corner and hide it from everybody else because they love it so much. But they let me have a glass, and so we make one tea punch with cane syrup and a lime, and it's such a simple thing. You can really taste how good your rum is. So I want to ask you, what cocktails, give me one or two cocktails that you think show off your rum that are popular and maybe easy to make.
Yeah, so my go-to and part of my independent plight is to free the daiquiri from the blender. Don't get me wrong.
It's so good when you make a real one.
Don't get me wrong. I love a frozen drink. There's a time and a place, and I've had many and plan to have many in the rest of my life. But I think that historically, the blender was part of the reason that the daiquiri got bastardized. A classic daiquiri, for anyone who doesn't know, is just simply rum, fresh lime juice, and simple syrup. I like the ratio of 2 ounces of Owney's to 3/4 of an ounce of fresh squeezed lime juice to 3/4 of an ounce of 1-to-1 sugar to water simple syrup. But it was a drink kind of created in the turn of, I think 1901 or something in Cuba. And it kind of lost its way somewhere after the blender was invented and Bach cane, high fructose corn syrup rather, mixes got dumped into a blender with ice, and like you pour some rum into it, and that's what a daiquiri is.
And some cheap rum too.
Totally. So
can I, before you go on to the second one, can you tell me if I'm wrong in this? Because I like to put pieces of lime and sugar cube to muddle, because I think the sugar helps get the like the zest out of the lime, and so it's a little more funky, a little bit more bright. Is that wrong?
I love that.
Oh, okay.
No, it's funny that you do that. Like at your sophisticated of a level of ICR marketing, because to me, I do that also all the time, but maybe so out of laziness, and I'm just like, I need this drink now, but I think it's really good. And I also like to use it to sell the daiquiri into like what I call a dive bar daiquiri. So like every bar, maybe you're not necessarily squeezing fresh lime juice or making simple syrup, but most bars have limes and sugar. So I like to like promote it as like, okay, just throw a couple of lime wedges at the bottom, muddle it up with a bar spoon of sugar, throw some ice on it, shake it up, and you have a daiquiri pretty much. Maybe not the most refined and sophisticated of daiquiris that you can get, but
I think there's something, I like bitter. I mean, that's the wine guy in me. I like a little bitter, and I think it adds a little lift or tension or something to it.
Yeah.
So sorry, but your other drink you like to make.
Yeah. And then I guess the next, I'm just thinking, I guess, of like my regularly scheduled drinks. I've had a lot of awesome cocktails over the years. I'll put like classic daiquiri, I'll put a Hemingway daiquiri in that same category. Yeah. Again, for those watching, it's maraschino liqueur instead of simple syrup, and you add grapefruit juice as well. But I'll put that in the total daiquiri category. And then my other go-tos are Negronis with Owney's, if I want something stirred and boozy. And then I also just do a lot of Owney's and soda with lime, like if I'm just wanting a long drink.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. I think it'd be good with Mexican Coke too.
Yeah, totally.
Like the real, get the sugar cane.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of at my half hour where I try to keep it relatively short. It's been such a pleasure to see you.
Jeff, I know.
We have to do this now. Now that we know we can, we'll do it more often.
I know.
We're both busy and I never see you. And you know what's funny? When you come to see me at the Waverly, I'm running around and I can never actually talk for a half an hour. So it's actually pretty awesome.
I know. I hope we can see each other there soon or somewhere soon.
So do I. Yeah. Just for everybody who's interested, I will put this on YouTube and I will send you the link. And I've been doing this to give people some virtual sunshine because everybody's cooped up and need to get outside. And generally, I'm chatting with winemakers in their vineyards. But I was talking to some friends in New York State that make wine, and I really realized how important it is to support local businesses. You're a small business with employees, and we really need to try to support our New York State people because we're all drinking, but try to spend some money locally.
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you, and thanks for supporting as always. Really matter.
I hope to see you very soon.
Yes.
Take care, honey.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you again.